You probably know that exercise is good for your biceps and your waistline and your heart. I mean, that is the standard fitness gospel we've all been taught since middle school gym class.
Right, yeah. So what everyone hears.
But what if your skeletal muscles are actually this massive hidden pharmacy just pumping out custom chemical messengers that directly wire your brain for better memory and, well, better mood?
I mean, it really fundamentally changes our entire biological paradigm.
Mm.
We have to stop seeing movement just as this crude mechanism to, burn calories or lift heavy things.
Yeah.
And we need to start recognizing it as a required biological signaling system for actual cognitive survival.
And that is exactly the mission of this deep dive today. We are going to decode what researchers are now calling the muscle-brain axis. And we have this incredible stack of sources today.
We really do, yeah.
3 dense, slightly intimidating, but absolutely fascinating academic papers. So we're looking at a study on connective tissue adaptation from the German Journal of Sports Medicine, a breakdown of myokines crossing the blood-brain barrier from Frontiers in Physiology, and finally, a 2025 review on the neuromuscular endocrine loop from the Journal of Neuropsychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences.
And, the central theme moving through all these papers is really transformation. We're going to explore how physical movement transforms your body, starting at the sheer mechanical level of your connective tissues.
Right, the physical stuff.
Exactly. And then tracing that physical force all the way up to the chemical and neurological architecture of your brain.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even talk about how a muscle chemically alters the brain, we first, we have to understand how muscles physically interact with the body to safely generate that massive force in the first place.
Without literally tearing themselves off the bone. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that brings us straight to the foundation,
Yeah.
which is the muscle tendon unit, or the MTU. If you want a healthy brain, the sources make it super clear that you need heavy mechanical force.
Right.
But you cannot generate or transfer that force without your tendons. And, we tend to think of tendons as just inert ropes.
Yeah, it's just like dumb biological string attaching a muscle to a bone.
Right. But in reality, they are these highly dynamic tissues that act like heavy-duty springs.
Springs that store and release elastic strain energy. But how does that actually help the muscle itself?
So think about the mechanics of a jump or a really heavy lift. When you move, your tendons stretch and then they recoil.
Okay.
Because the tendon is acting like a spring and taking on a large proportion of that physical length change, the actual muscle fascicles, so the bundles of muscle fibers themselves, they barely have to change length at all.
Oh, wow. So they stay somewhat static.
Yeah, they can stay in their optimal, most powerful position. And this allows the muscle to generate maximum force with incredible economic efficiency.
But reading through that German Journal of Sports Medicine paper, there is a massive biological catch to this whole system. Because muscle tissue and tendon tissue adapt to the stress of a workout at completely different rates, right?
Oh, yeah. It is a very dangerous disconnect, actually. See, muscles have a rich, dense blood supply. When you break them down in the gym, they get flooded with nutrients.
Right, so they adapt and grow pretty quickly.
Exactly. They strengthen relatively fast. Tendons, on the other hand, are largely avascular. They have a very poor blood supply, so they adapt much, much slower.
It's like upgrading a car's engine. The muscle is this brand new 500 horsepower engine you just dropped under the hood, but the tendon is still the flimsy factory transmission.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Yeah, so if you upgrade the engine but completely ignore the transmission, the whole system just blows out the second you step on the gas.
Right, because if the muscle pulls with this massive new force, but the tendon remains too compliant, meaning it's too stretchy and hasn't stiffened up to match the engine's power, that high strain challenges the physical integrity of the tissue.
It just gives way.
Yeah, the tendon stretches too far, the fibers begin to fray, and you end up with a severe tear or even a rupture. So tendon stiffness, which is actually the goal here, must perfectly balance with muscle strength to create real resilience.
So how do we actually upgrade the transmission? Because doing a standard set of fast bicep curls clearly isn't doing enough for the tendon. And the German journal source provides a very highly specific evidence-based training paradigm just for optimal tendon adaptation.
Right, because to force a tendon to stiffen and adapt safely, you cannot just rely on quick light pumping motions. The tissue simply won't register the signal.
Yeah, the paper specifically recommends 5 sets of 4 repetitive contractions. But here is the really critical part. They have to be at an intensity of about 90% of your maximum isometric capability, and you have to maintain that hold for 3 full seconds per repetition.
3 seconds of near maximum isometric hold per rep. It's intense.
I mean, if you picture holding a really heavy squat or a loaded leg extension at the absolute hardest part of the movement for 3 full seconds, that is an agonizing amount of sustained tension. Why 3 seconds?
Because tendons require high magnitude strain over an extended duration to trigger mechanotransduction.
You're making transduction.
Yeah, which is just the process where a physical pull is converted into a chemical signal inside the cell. The sustained tension physically squeezes the cells inside the tendon, forcing them to synthesize new collagen and increase their structural stiffness.
Okay, so that establishes our mechanical foundation, right? We stiffen the tendon to safely handle the force. But what is that intense physical force actually triggering on a cellular level inside the muscle belly itself? Because this is where these papers just take a totally wild turn.
Oh, absolutely. We see a total paradigm shift in human physiology here.
Yeah.
Because historically, we viewed skeletal muscles purely as biological pulleys for locomotion.
Just meat moving bones.
Yeah, exactly. But the current research proves that skeletal muscles are actually endocrine organs.
Wait, actually have to push back on that terminology a bit. When I hear endocrine system, I immediately think of dedicated glands. I think of the thyroid, the pituitary, the adrenal glands pumping out adrenaline.
Sure.
How can a bicep or a calf muscle suddenly be classified alongside the thyroid as part of an endocrine loop?
Well, it really comes down to what they synthesize and secrete into the bloodstream. When muscle fibers contract, especially during strenuous draining exercise, they manufacture complex signaling molecules called myokines. And these are a specific category of exocrine, which is just a blanket term for any chemical released during exercise. These myokines don't just stay locally in the arm or the leg.
Right, they travel.
They leave the muscle, they enter the circulatory system, and they travel to distant organs, establishing a direct bidirectional line of communication between the muscle and the brain.
So the muscle is literally manufacturing drugs and pushing them into the bloodstream. But, how does it know when to do that? What actually flips the switch from resting muscle to active pharmacy?
Energy depletion.
Yeah.
That acts as the primary trigger. When you exercise hard, you rapidly burn through your cellular energy stores, specifically your ATP.
Okay, your basic cellular energy.
Exactly. And this sudden drop in energy disturbs your metabolic homeostasis. Your cells basically realize they are running out of battery, and that panic activates specific molecular adaptation pathways.
And the research highlights 2 major ones here, right? The AMPK metabolic sensor pathway and the PGC1 pathway, which, by the way, PGC1 alpha, that acronym, came up on almost every single page of the Frontiers in Physiology paper.
It's everywhere in the research, yeah. Think of AMPK as the low battery sensor on your phone. When it detects that cellular energy is critically low, it sends a panic signal to PGC1, which is the master genetic regulator.
Oh, I see.
And PGC1 immediately kicks off mitochondrial biogenesis, which means it commands the cell to build brand new energy factories to handle the demand.
Right.
But more importantly for our deep dive today, PGC1 also acts as the dispatcher for the pharmacy. It regulates the secretion of these myokines, commanding the muscle to release these chemical messengers out into the body to basically call for systemic backup.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's one thing for muscles to dump chemicals into the blood. I mean, the heart pumps blood everywhere. But to actually alter memory and mood, these chemicals have to penetrate the brain's highly secure VIP section, the blood-brain barrier.
And the blood-brain barrier is incredibly strict. It is a tightly packed layer of endothelial cells designed to keep toxins, pathogens, and wild chemical fluctuations out of the brain's delicate environment.
Yeah, it's a fortress.
Most things in your blood simply bounce right off it. But evolution designed certain myokines with a VIP pass to slip right through. And the undisputed MVP of these neurochemicals is BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Right, and BDNF is frequently described in pop science as miracle grow for the brain. But what is it actually doing up there once it gets in?
So it promotes neurogenesis, which is the literal physical birth of new neurons in the hippocampus, your memory center.
Wow.
It is also the critical foundation for long-term potentiation, or LTP. And LTP is the cellular mechanism behind learning. It's how synapses strengthen their connections so you can actually retain new information.
And the brain makes this too, right?
It does. Interestingly, 70 to 80% of the BDNF circulating in your body originates in the brain itself.
Mm.
But when you engage in intense exercise, BDNF levels just spike globally across the entire system.
But the sources emphasize that BDNF doesn't just work in a vacuum, though. The muscle sends up supporting characters to help it function, specifically IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1.
Yes, a very important player.
But I mean, I usually associate IGF-1 with resistance training and getting physically bigger. What is a muscle-building hormone doing inside the brain?
Well, its local job is absolutely to promote muscle hypertrophy, making your muscle fibers larger and denser to handle the load. But a significant portion of that IGF-1 leaves the muscle, travels up the bloodstream, and successfully crosses the blood-brain barrier.
And it changes jobs.
Exactly. Once inside the brain, it completely changes its role. It becomes a crucial upstream regulator for BDNF.
Okay, so it's controlling how the brain actually utilizes the BDNF.
Yes. See, your brain naturally produces a precursor molecule called pro-BDNF. Think of it as a dormant, inactive state. The brain has the materials, but it can't use them yet. When the exercise-induced IGF-1 enters the brain, it facilitates the conversion of that inactive pro-BDNF into the active neuroprotective BDNF. And in rodent models, researchers have found that this specific conversion process is heavily associated with profound antidepressant and anti-anxiety effects.
Okay, so it's like if BDNF is the construction crew doing the actual neurogenesis and building the new pathways in the brain, IGF-1 is the keymaster.
I like that, yeah.
It unlocks the construction site, hands the crew their hard hats, and tells them to get to work. Without that keymaster arriving from the muscle, the brain's construction crew is just sitting around drinking coffee, completely dormant.
That is exactly it. And that proves why resistance training is not just cosmetic. The muscle contraction is a mandatory requirement to send the IGF-1 up to the brain to put the existing BDNF to work.
But you know, the muscle-brain axis isn't just a straightforward delivery system of growth factors. Reading through the Frontiers paper, I noticed the muscle also releases chemicals that have a very dark, paradoxical double life in the medical world.
Yes, they do.
Cathepsin B, or CTSB, is a perfect example of this.
And this is where the biology gets beautifully nuanced, but also, a bit confusing at first glance. Cathepsin B is a lysosomal enzyme.
Okay.
And lysosomes are essentially the recycling centers or the garbage disposals of your cells. They break down waste.
Right.
Well, in pathological states like severe obesity or in the microenvironment of certain tumors, cathepsin B leaks out of the lysosome and into the main body of the cell. And when it leaks, it causes massive systemic inflammation, tissue damage, and cell death.
Wow.
In fact, oncologists literally use it as a biomarker for tumor imaging.
Right, so if a doctor sees elevated cathepsin B in a sedentary patient's blood work, all the alarm bells ring. But, and this is crazy, the study shows that exercise-induced CTSB acts completely differently.
It really does.
They had mice run on wheels, and those running mice showed increased CTSB crossing the blood-brain barrier. But instead of causing brain damage, it upregulated BDNF and significantly improved their spatial memory. So how can the exact same chemical, a known tumor biomarker, suddenly become a brain-boosting good guy just because you jumped on a treadmill? Does context change the chemistry?
What's fascinating here is exactly that, how the context fundamentally alters the chemistry. Exercise completely changes the cellular environment.
Okay.
In a sedentary, obese state, CTSB leakage is part of an uncontrolled chronic inflammatory cascade. The body is in crisis mode. But during a workout, the release of CTSB is transient and tightly regulated. It promotes a process called healthy autophagy.
Autophagy being the process of clearing out the dead cells, right?
Exactly. It's cellular house cleaning. The workout generates metabolic waste and cellular junk. The regulated CTSB helps clear that out. And when it crosses the blood-brain barrier in this healthy, tightly controlled state, it doesn't act like an inflammatory wrecking ball. The brain's receptors read it as a vital signaling molecule that triggers the hippocampus to boost neurogenesis.
That context shift is wild, and we actually see the exact same paradox with another chemical called interleukin-6, or IL-6, right?
We do, yeah. IL-6 is widely known in immunology as a potent pro-inflammatory cytokine. If you have chronic systemic elevation of IL-6, you are likely dealing with severe obesity, insulin resistance, or autoimmune issues.
Not good.
Not good at all. But when IL-6 is secreted directly by your skeletal muscle during a bout of endurance training, particularly from your slow-twitch muscle fibers, it behaves entirely differently. Exercise-induced IL-6 is highly anti-inflammatory.
It literally flips from causing insulin resistance to actively fighting it.
Yeah.
How does the mechanism change?
It comes down to how it interacts with cellular receptors during physical exertion. Exercise-induced IL-6 actively enhances glucose uptake.
Okay, so it pulls in sugar.
Exactly. It mobilizes these microscopic doorways called GLUT4 receptors. Normally, these doors sit inside the cell, but IL-6 forces them to the surface of both muscle and brain cells,
Opening them up.
opening the doors so the cells can pull massive amounts of glucose out of the blood for energy. Furthermore, it triggers lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat via that AMPK low battery pathway we discussed earlier. It forces the body to efficiently process fuel rather than store it pathologically.
So if IL-6 is managing all this cellular fuel, what happens to the byproducts of burning that fuel? Because anyone who has ever been on a spin bike or done a hard sprint knows the intense burning sensation in their legs.
The bird, yeah.
And for decades, athletes and coaches have just dismissed lactate or lactic acid as this toxic waste product causing muscle fatigue.
And that remains one of the greatest misconceptions in all of sports physiology.
Really?
L-lactate is not a waste product. It is a premium preferred fuel source. During intense anaerobic exercise, your muscles rapidly produce lactate. It enters the bloodstream and travels straight up to the blood-brain barrier.
How does it get in?
To get across, it uses very specific shuttle systems called monocarboxylate transporters. Once inside, the brain eagerly consumes the lactate for metabolic energy. It actually prefers it over glucose during high physical stress.
But the 2025 review in the Journal of Neuropsychiatry points out that it isn't just food for the brain, right? The brain doesn't just eat it, it reads it.
Yes. Researchers recently discovered a highly specific receptor in the brain called HCAR1.
HDR1, right.
When lactate crosses the barrier and binds to this HCAR1 receptor, it directly modulates neuronal firing. It acts almost like a neurotransmitter, regulating how entire networks of neurons communicate with each other during a workout.
And it triggers structural changes, too, because the sources show that lactate directly increases VEGF.
Vascular endothelial growth factor, yes. VEGF is the primary driver of angiogenesis, which is the literal creation of brand new blood vessels.
Wow, okay.
When lactate spikes VEGF levels in the hippocampus, it triggers the growth of microscopic new capillaries. It is basically building new biological roads to increase blood flow, ensuring that the newly birthed neurons from the BDNF have the oxygen and the nutrients they desperately need to survive.
Okay, so we have the fuel and we have the roads, but there is one more critical player in this loop. The Frontiers paper heavily highlighted irisin, which comes from a very strange mechanical process involving a protein called FNDC5.
Yeah, this is where the mechanical friction of movement really meets the chemistry. FNDC5 is a protein sitting right on the membrane of your muscle cells.
Okay.
During high-intensity exercise, the sheer physical force and contraction of the muscle literally cleaves or shears off a piece of that FNDC5 protein, and that sheared-off fragment enters the bloodstream as the myokine irisin.
And what happens when irisin reaches the brain? Because the studies on mice in the source material were staggering.
They were. Peripherally, irisin alters bone density, but centrally, in the brain, it is a master regulator of cognitive processes. In the mouse models, when researchers genetically deleted the irisin gene, the mice exhibited dramatically worsened Alzheimer's symptoms and severe cognitive decline.
Oh, wow.
Conversely, when they boosted irisin levels, it reduced depressive behaviors. The mice navigated mazes better and showed much higher stress resilience. Irisin directly stimulates the PGC1 pathway in the hippocampus, which triggers the release of even more BDNF.
So what does this all mean? If you zoom out and look at the whole picture, a hard workout isn't just about burning calories. It is this orchestrated, complex chemical symphony playing out across your entire body.
Beautifully orchestrated, yeah.
Lactate provides the premium cellular fuel, VEGF builds the vascular roads to deliver it, IGF-1 unlocks the gates at the construction site, and BDNF actually builds the new brain cells, all while irisin and CTSB act as the project managers, keeping the inflammation in check and the whole system running smoothly.
It's amazing. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it irrevocably proves that physical and cognitive health are not separate domains. The psychiatric health of your mind is inextricably linked to the mechanical tension in your tendons and the metabolic burn in your muscle fibers.
They're tied together.
They're one unified system.
Yeah.
From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. If our ancestors were exerting that much intense physical energy, they were likely navigating a high-stakes, dangerous environment, either hunting or being hunted.
Right, survival mode.
Exactly. The brain needed to be at its absolute sharpest to map new terrain and remember exactly where threats were. The physical exhaustion was the exact trigger the brain needed to grow.
It really redefines what it means to be well-informed about exercise. You cannot just look at it as a mechanism to look good in a swimsuit or fit into a pair of jeans.
No, not at all.
To truly understand human physiology, you must view exercise as both a mechanical and a neurological intervention.
You absolutely do. You need the heavy, agonizing 3-second isometric holds at 90% of your maximum effort to force your connective tissue to synthesize collagen and keep your tendons stiff and resilient.
Yeah.
But you also need the rigorous lung-burning aerobic and resistance training to drain your cellular battery, trigger the AMPK alarm, and physically squeeze those neuroprotective myokines out of your muscle fibers, across your blood-brain barrier, and into your memory centers.
The hidden pharmacy is very real, but it keeps its doors locked unless you do the work. The muscle holds the medicine, but you have to earn the prescription.
It requires a biological key, and that key is intense, deliberate physical effort.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive exploration of the sources today. Decoding the muscle-brain axis reveals just how beautifully complex, deeply integrated, and entirely responsive our bodies really are to the demands we place on them.
It really does. And, this raises an important question, and I'd actually like to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our skeletal muscles evolved over millions of years to act as a personalized pharmacy dispensing essential neuroprotective medicine only when we vigorously and consistently move, how might our increasingly sedentary, automated modern lifestyle be literally starving our brains of the chemical signals they desperately require to stay sane, to remember our past, and to build our future?
Wow, a pharmacy running completely out of stock just because we stopped walking to the counter. Well, until next time, keep diving deep!